All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're actually going to be continuing the ayah that we were working on yesterday. I believe we did وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَتَوَفَّاكُم بِاللَّيْلِ وَيَعْلَمُ مَا جَرَحْتُم بِالنَّهَارِ ثُمَّ يَبْعَثُكُم فِيهِ لِيُقْضَى أَجَلٌ مُّسَمًّى ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ ثُمَّ يُنَبِّئُكُم بِمَا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. And yesterday we talked about the word يَتَوَفَّاكُم بِاللَّيْلِ, whether that was speaking about a limit to something, the end of a limit to something, whether that was the end of a limit of one energy, or whether that was the end of a limit of a certain time, or whether that was the end of a limit, whether we're speaking about force or whatever it is. So just different limits right there. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا جَرَحْتُم بِالنَّهَارِ. The Lord Almighty knows what you had. We said whether it's to inflict or whether it is to cause or whether it is to induce or whether it is to basically do in general. We went in details with that. So whether it was referring to the limbs or whether it was referring to our senses or whether it's that is basically referring to us and what we had basically committed or caused or inflicted throughout the day. And then we went in some details whether this ayah is going into this type of chronology throughout the day, throughout the night, throughout the day, and then making during the day be as al-Ba'th, be as the resurrection, and then لِيُقْضَى أَجَلٌ مُّسَمًّى, that they'll live long enough till a certain appointed time. In other words, death comes to them, and then their resurrection, in other words, their return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then He would tell us what we would do. And that was the first opinion. And the second opinion was saying, well, no, it's not necessarily that chronology, at least within this ayah, but then this ayah was actually talking about during the day, giving us that parable that what happened throughout that night and day of you being asleep and you being basically alert during the day, that's basically going to be the same pattern in the same system, in the same paradigm, that's going to be the way that you would be resurrected. You would basically live until an appointed time, then you would return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore, according to the second interpretation, that يَبَعَثُكُمْ فِي is referring to this life, that the way you would wake up to basically do different activity during the day, that's very similar to that resurrection on Judgment Day, لِيُقْضَى أَجَلٌ مُّسَمًّى, and that during the day you would have a certain ajal, you have a certain appointed, whether rizq or whether activity or whether we're speaking about time. So whether we're speaking about time, we're speaking about rizq, we're speaking about just different provisions. That's basically what al-ajal is. Remember that ajal in that hadith when the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned about the hadith Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, when the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned inna ahadakum yub'athu, no, what was the word? Inna ahadakum, forgot the actual word for it, but في بطن أمه 40 إن أحدكم يجمع خلقه, that's the word, في بطن أمه 40 يوما نطفة. And then of course we would talk about the hadith would talk about the 40 days and what happens the first 40 days, and then he says that after the 120th day, then the angel would come and basically ask, what should I write in regards to this? And then he would write the ajal, and he would also write the rizq, and he would also write shaqiyun aw sa'id. Remember that? So is that ajal, that ajal that is written, is that relating to rizq, meaning life, meaning time, or is that relating to rizq, meaning the different provisions, the different wealth that you would get, the different forces, the different potentials that you would get, whether we're speaking about physical potentials, maybe mental potentials, just different things that you would get, those kind of potentials? Is that ajal musamma? and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had predetermined, or is it had pre-decreed or preordained, or just had already known what was going to happen even before things take place? So when you say jarahtum bin nahar, in that context, that would actually mean what you had put in as an effort, and therefore that effort was going to bring in the rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already pre-decreed what effort you're going to get, what efforts you're going to put in order to get the rizq. Okay, so think of it this way. What effort are you going to be a person of probably unemployment, or are you going to be a person of employment? What job you're going to do, and how this job is going to generate a certain rizq. Okay. ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ. So in other words, the way that you would see that pattern throughout the night, throughout the day, you basically similar to resurrection, but you putting in a certain amount of force, and then certainly there's a certain end to it. And ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ, that this is the reminder. So then this, in that context, would be ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ, meaning to let you be aware that all of this that you are basically investing in, what rizq you would get, what effort you would invest, and certainly all of that was going to be your place of question. Because if you were to look at this ayah, and you were to also look at another hadith, let's look at another hadith that basically is involved to this one, which is the Prophet ﷺ said that you would not pass, okay, the first thing that you would be asked about in the grave is basically four things, okay? And he talked about your age, your youthhood especially, so that's talking about time. Number two, you're talking about what knowledge where you got your knowledge from, what did you do with your knowledge. Number three, it's talking about the money, where you got your money from, what you invested your money in, and certainly all of that is basically going to be relating to what most important potentials you had basically invested them in. So whether we're speaking about wealth, knowledge, age, and certainly the most important thing is basically all of those things that make your own identity. So then ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ would just remind us that all of those different potentials that you were given, and even the rizq that you were given, all of that is going to be إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ. All of that is going to be what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would question you about. What did you do with your time? What did you do with your power, especially during your youthhood? What did you do with the knowledge? What did you do with your money? How did you make that money? What did you do with it? What did you invest with it? All of these different things, basically, ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ, and then وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. We went in details with that one, and we talked about al-Qahir before, which basically is the one to overcome. We talked about the connotations, and we talked about the word فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, beyond his servants. And when we talk about beyond his servants, is it beyond to mean this is a metaphor? Because the word fawqa means above. Okay, so if we're talking about that being a metaphor, beyond might give the connotation that it's a metaphor. And that's a problem, because the word literally says fawqa. Are we going to interpret fawqa like Ahl al-Hadith and say, no, fawqa actually means up, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the skies, is in the heavens? Or are we going to interpret it as the Asha'ira and say fawqa just means beyond, meaning beyond in his ability, beyond in his power, beyond in the potentials, since he was talking about the potentials there and your potentials and all that you were granted in terms of that. So this is basically just reminding you that if you wanted to somehow take advantage of your potentials, just remember that the Lord Almighty's potentials are beyond your potentials. Therefore, your potentials are not going to exceed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. That's the second interpretation. And you saw the first interpretation basically has the same idea, which is فوق, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above. Is, well, above to meaning in place. Okay? So whether you explained it as above in place, meaning in the heavens, that still makes it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he is beyond in place, then that doesn't necessarily negate, okay? That does not negate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond in power, okay? So what I want you to see, notice that a lot of times, okay, the debate between Ahl al-Hadith and the Asha'ira is really that debate, did you just negate something? So what happens? For the Asha'ira, they'll consider that you just negated a meaning, a metaphorical meaning, which is that he's stronger, he's more powerful, all of that, okay? And that by Ahl al-Hadith interpretation, that you just focused on place, but then you negated all the different meanings that this word also contains. For Ahl al-Hadith, they'll say, you just negated something else. You just negated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the heavens. You focused on one thing, but then you ended up negating one thing. What we would say, okay, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said fawqa, he's in the heavens, because even the beginning of Surah Al-An'am, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَهُوَ فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَهُ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَهُ. He's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heavens. And also, it's also the Lord Almighty that is the Lord on earth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he is فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the heavens. So we'll just leave it at that. Now, at the same time, we don't negate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala contains those potentials either. And that's why you go back to the ayah, if you remember, we always like going back to that ayah, which is in Surah Ash-Shura. Okay, in Surah Ash-Shura, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فاطر السماوات والأرض جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا يذرأكم فيه ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. So yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will lay out that the paradigm, which is in that ayah, the binary system, and said, ليس كمثله شيء. You can't compare and use the system that you would see on earth, whether the system that you would see in sleep, waking up, a certain appointed time, all of that, you can't use this system and apply it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he is al-Qahir. So with the same idea that certainly this system is a system in this galaxy, but this doesn't apply on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Ayat al-Kursi, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum, la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically almighty, no sleep, and not even the beginning of sleep takes over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you think of يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ يَعْلَمُ مَا جَرَحْتُمْ فِي النَّهَارِ, you follow a certain pattern. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. He is beyond this system. Therefore, do not confuse the systems and apply it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he is al-Qahir. He is basically the one to control the system. He created the system. Therefore, you cannot use the system and apply it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why in Surah Ash-Shura, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us that لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because he's al-Qahir فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. At the same time, this is not to negate that وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. This is not to negate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qahir fawqa ibadihi, that He overcomes their power, overcomes them, overcomes that is the servants, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond. So just by saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the samawat does not necessarily mean that we had negated, okay, that He is also overcoming the servants. وَيُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَفَظًا, and He would send il-hafaza. We went in details with the word hafaza. We said it means preservers, but it was referring to the angels, and certainly the angels would preserve the soul. There's a special way and a special, let's consider it as a special, whether it's a preservation or whether where these souls are kept. You could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in a very specific order. And the same thing when we're speaking about, let's say, even bringing death or the hereafter, everything is within a specific order. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not create anything in chaos whatsoever. Even in akhirah, there's no such thing as chaos. Dunya is created in a very specific and an intricate order, and so is akhirah. So when you look at yursilu alaykum hafadha, certain angels come with a certain mission. Those ones, do they hand it to the different angels of rahmah, angels of mercy, angels of adhab, etc.? That's a different story. But at the end, we know that they're malaika of rahmah and malaika of adhab. You know, one thing I would say, when you basically are present with people that are dying, there's one thing that I had noticed happening, and something that's quite interesting. But when you would ask, and when they're capable of speaking, not always is a dying person capable of speaking, but they would, while they're dying, they would, there's that moment. It doesn't last for long, by the way, but there's that moment while they're dying that while they're dying, they're probably going through different secretions. Their body is, slowing down. You could see heart rate, you could see changes, but there's at one point when it's suddenly this person that is dying would all of a sudden open their eyes and just start looking around everywhere in the room all of a sudden and start talking to the things around them or whatever it is. It doesn't last long, by the way. And once that happens, that's that moment. It only lasts about 3-4 minutes, just about that long. And then the person then all of a sudden goes into a very big downfall. And then that's when you would see that they would lose conscience, they would lose their conscience, they would start basically right there, the complete no going back. There's that 3-4 minute window that they're just looking around, and they might actually respond. What are you saying? They might say 4, 5, 7. I've noticed that those numbers, you would see some would tell me 5, some would tell me 7, some would not respond in counting. They're just saying too many, and just looking around, and they would just look around swiftly at one point, and then sometimes look to the right, look to the left. You could see that there's something going on that we cannot see. That only lasts for about 3-4 minutes, like I said, and then all of a sudden you would see their heartbeat dropping at a very strong drop, and then their blood pressure very strong drop, and then of course that's when you would see the secretions got worse and worse. They can't breathe anymore. And that's when it might actually, this kind of drop, it might last an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on the person. And then they would basically just completely die. After their death, you may see certain changes on the person's face after their death. While they're dying, things like sweaty forehead, that's something that Salihin would usually have, sweaty foreheads. And the sweaty forehead, usually, if they're Salihin, it would usually have later a very sweet smell. The way that I can describe this smell is something like jasmine smell. It would smell like jasmine smell. And I would say, when the jasmine, especially at maybe 2 a.m., 3 a.m., the jasmine would have a very special smell at around that time. Not during the day, but during that 2 a.m., 3 a.m., the jasmine would have a very special sweet smell. That's the smell that you would see and feel. By the way, I'm somebody that is very, very sensitive to smell. Even if a mouse would pass by me, I would know that there was a smell of a mouse that passed by me. I'm very sensitive to smell. And I can tell smells just by, and even if you were to put a dish in front of me, I would tell you which spices are in there just by smelling it, even from far. So alhamdulillah, I'm very sensitive to smell. And that's why I know I'm telling you at a specific timing of a smell that you would get of a jasmine, and a specific timing of what the dead, if they are salihin, and what they would smell like. And this is something that I had seen. I'm just trying to, let you get that smell, the vision of what I would sense when somebody is dying. Alhamdulillah, I was present with a number of different people dying, and this is what I was capable of observing. And certainly with the dying process, while they're dying, some would actually die with happiness and some would die with anger. The ones that didn't necessarily live their best deen, the amount of excruciating pain would many times make them swear, yell, swear at those that are around them out of anger, etc. And others, they would basically just disregard the pain and just focus on their dhikr. And that's something to train. That was the training that they were doing during the dunya, during their life. They were always, whenever they would encounter a hard situation, those were the people that would just disregard the pain, not focus on the pain, not focus on the challenge, but focus on the dhikr. And those are the people that you would really see, I guess, living it while they're dying. The ones that focused on the pain is there for both, but some would learn how to disregard the pain and remember the value of that moment, that if you die on La ilaha illallah, that's going to guarantee you Jannah. They've been practicing this throughout the time. Whenever they would feel pain, they would disregard the pain. Whenever they would go through challenges, they would disregard the challenge and focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that you would see, in those many cases, that you would see that a pattern. And that's why it's important to do that training throughout your life. Whenever you would encounter something, you lost a job, you lost a loved one, are you going to say Hasbi Allahu ni'mal wakil like the people of Gaza? Are you going to then probably lash out at X or Y and Z, and that it's their fault. If only this happened, this wouldn't have happened. It was X or Y and Z. They were the ones that were always getting this person angry or whatever it is. And are you going to lash out on that person, or are you going to use that moment to say, قضاء وقدر ربي إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون اللهم إني أسألك أن تربط على قلبي, all these different du'as. You're going to do that, or are you going to focus on the pain? Are you going to focus on the calamity, or are you going to focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So, حتى إذا جاء أحدكم الموت توفته رسلنا. And by the way, I forgot to mention one thing, is that, those pictures that they would have for certain people that they died and you could see a smile on their face, or a smile on their faces. Those aren't actually true pictures, by the way. Those aren't fake. Those aren't photoshopped. I mean, some are, but I'll tell you, it is true that some people, you would actually see them smiling, or even literally like they're laughing while they're dying. This is true. I had seen that with my own eyes of people, wallahi, they would be smiling and showing a really happy facial expression while they're dead or while they're dying. How and why, what did they say, and all of that? Certainly it's a place of question, but at the same time, we would see that the people that had put in a history of salah, we could see that certainly that's what pays off. And we had also seen the people that didn't die on salah, but then, or on piety, but then you would see their faces darken. They could see after their death, there's certainly every single dead body, of course, we know that it decomposes, but we could definitely see a huge difference between certain bodies where the smell would definitely smell horrible right away. Right away, you would smell a horrible smell out of that body. Right away. And even their loved ones can't stand being next to them because the smell is just beyond. It stinks. It smells, certainly, it smells like a dead body. I mean, yes, a dead body, Ya Rabbi, nas'allah al-afwa wal-afiyah. But then there's definitely a huge difference between body A and body B. Body A smelled like jasmine at this time of 2 a.m. Body B, it smelled like a dead piece of meat. If you want to know what that smells like, put a piece of meat and in a piece, just like a piece of meat, like a small piece of meat, and just put it in a bag. Okay, put it in a bag, close it tightly. Just put it away for a couple of days, and just open it up later on. Don't put it in the fridge. Let it, just decompose outside, but just make sure that you close it tightly. That's what a dead person that is not salih would smell like. That's how they would smell like. And they would decompose a lot faster. They would decompose a lot faster. You could really see it if you worked in washing dead bodies. You could really see that. I've had cases where some of my students would call me. I used to do classes on washing and shrouding the dead. And many times my students would call me and say, hey, can I not wash this body because the smell is too powerful because of how fast that they decomposed, and it was going to be at the risk of their own health. So we would just say, okay, we'll keep them in the bag and just wipe over the bag and do tayammum over the bag because it was too strong for them to handle. The smell, the body had completely decomposed. The maggots are so disgusting, and it was going to be at the expense and at the certainly risking the person that is washing and shrouding. It's going to be risking their health. So we would just say, just leave the person in that bag. And usually, of course, at least in America, even if that body had basically died, they would usually have to go through autopsy. So they would put the body inside a bag. So that's why, it would be inside the bag. But even when the body is inside the bag, but you could still smell the bag smelling horribly. Even though they're inside this bag and it's completely sealed, and even when it's actually in the casket, but the smell would be so horrible that it would even this casket would stink. Even the casket would smell. They would put lots of perfume, the morticians, they might put perfume and all of that, but you would still see and feel the smell. The Salihin, on the other hand, certainly it is the sunnah to shroud and wash the dead and put things like different perfumes, like musk and flowers, and some would put sage. In some countries, they would put sage, and you can put dried flowers, these things. That's a sunnah, and even put on the places of their sujood, okay, the 7 different areas, put some fragrance on it, like musk fragrance or probably anbar, those different fragrances. You could do that. It's the sunnah. But that fragrance is not what I'm talking about for a salih person. No, I'm talking about a different fragrance before even washing and shrouding the person. There's a certain fragrance that person, basically, if he is salih or she is salihah, you would smell it on their forehead, on their palms, on their places of sujood. The palms, the forehead, their feet, as well, the places of sujood, the certain areas in the feet or on the feet. You would smell it there. And that's, yes, it's my own experience. You could try it, test it, and see. And all you're going to say, أشهد بأن محمد النبي أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. You're going to say it. I really recommend learning how to wash and shroud. It really increases your iman. Learning how to wash and shroud in being a volunteer and participating in washing and shrouding the dead is basically something that will increase your deen, because it helps you recognize not only the ending of others, but also your ending, and that's what you want to prepare for. There's nothing that is a bigger maw'idha or a bigger reminder than death. Because death, it just takes you into that moment of silence. No words to be said. It's a moment of silence that is more powerful than any words to describe, explain, or even talk about. It's that silence that beats all eloquence. That's it. The silence that leaves every speech and every eloquent person speechless because there are no words to describe. And this is beyond. وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. That's the word. When you see death, when you see it and you hold their bodies and you see that these people had become literally as hard as a rock, you start just feeling the true meaning of وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, that he's basically the one that is beyond, that is the overcomer over his servants. There's nothing that is going to overcome the power of the Lord Almighty. And just as يُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَفَظًا, that he would send the different hafadha, the different angels. If one basically is destined to death, then those hafadha, those angels that were sent with one mission, they would basically come with that mission, and then وَهُمْ لَا يُفَرِّطُونَ. Now, let's look at the word وَهُمْ لَا يُفَرِّطُونَ. Let's look at what al-Qurtubi had to say about that. وَهُمْ لَا يُفَرِّطُونَ, there's one meaning. يُفَرِّطُونَ would basically mean that they would not whatsoever have any shortcomings. In other words, they will do the job right. And that's basically what they were sent to do, which is to basically be on a mission to do the job right. As hard as it is, they know how to do that job. There are angels that are specifically anointed and chosen to basically do the job of distracting the souls from the human bodies and put them to death. لا يفرطون, one, because the word حفظ could actually mean to preserve something. It could also mean that from one area, to preserve something could mean to keep it intact, and to preserve something could also mean to keep it safe. Okay, so that's why the scholars, that يفرطون, they said, well, that means they're not going to lose it. They're not going to have any shortcomings because they would obey the order of the Lord Almighty. So therefore, الفرط, the root فرط, actually means to have shortcomings. Yet there is another قراءة, وهم لا يفرطون. So the first one was يفرطون. The second قراءة يفرطون, to mean that they're not going to exceed the limits in what they were ordered to do, from perhaps maybe giving honor or even humiliating that soul. Wait. لا يفرطون, to mean that they would not exceed the limit. This one, يفرطون, that they would not have any shortcomings. They will do as ordered. Okay, but you could see that although this one basically means that they will not have shortcomings, and this one basically means that they would not exceed the limit, it's like it's in that area. This one is looking at yufarrit to mean that they would not have their shortcomings, looking at it from the other end. And the other one is looking at it from the other end, which is لا إفراط ولا تفريط. Okay, what is that? It's basically not in between the two extremes. This one is looking at it that they would not have any shortcomings, and this one's looking at it from the other extreme, which is that they would not exceed the limit. Okay, so at the end, it really goes within the same parameter. Just want you to see those different qira'at. يفرطون is the first qira'ah. يفرطون is the second qira'ah. ثم ردوا إلى الله مولاهم الحق. Then they would be returned to their Lord Almighty. What? After what? So after their soul is taken. So that takes us to Surah al-Fajr. Should we go to Surah al-Fajr? Let's just remember this is a page 144. Let's go to Surah al-Fajr for a bit, because it's going to take us a little bit. Okay, hold on. Let's go to Surah al-Fajr. Surah al-Jinn, no, it's going to be before that. Well, before that from this side. Okay, let's see. Surah al-Fajr. Oh, good job. Here we go. We found it. Let's see what happens. وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا. So first of all, كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا. كلا is basically rejecting. It's a word that rejects all that they had lived for, which is that they would be gathering all the different inheritance and all the different wealth, and they would love the money, and they would severely love money. But then the Lord Almighty would bring this earth to a dekkan dekka. In other words, a magnificent in a very severe shape. And the Lord Almighty and the angels would come in lines. So the angels would be in lines. The Lord Almighty would basically gather all the creatures, including angels. The angels would be lined up, the people would be lined up. And here, if you were to talk about the angels lined up, well, everybody else then is lined up. Okay, the Lord Almighty would then, of course, جاء يومئذ وجيء sorry جيء يومئذ بجهنم نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Then as well as hellfire would also be presented. يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان. That's when the human beings would remember. وأنى له الذكرى. And what, of course, certainly, أن is just giving a whoa. It's like that moment, they remember everything. In other words, there are certain things, it's quite interesting that, what studies are telling us, scientific studies, is that even after a person dies, that there's this area of memory that is still showing brain activity, even after the person is actually announced dead. So when the person dies, they would think, okay, they're just dead, everything's done. But they don't recognize that the person is actually showing, MRI scans are showing that there's still some brain activity, and specifically the area that is related to memory. And as if they're all of a sudden remembering all of the things that went throughout their life at that moment. It's like a whole thing that's passing in their memory. So what's the brain activity doing? I thought they were dead. Yes, it's a different thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even tells us that while the person is actually announced dead, that the dead is even capable at that moment of knowing who's around them, who's washing and shrouding them, and who's carrying their casket, and then they wouldn't even recognize that they were the dead ones until they are buried. They attempt to get up, but then they discover that, oh, it's actually me that's dead. That's so scary. يا ربي اللهم احسن ختامنا. So let's continue. يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي. Then this person that basically had preceded, or at least had given in their life, something that was not of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered. They would say, I wish we had presented in our life of what would be in support of what I'm living right now. فَيَوْمَئِذٍ لَا يُعَذِّبُ عَذَابَهُ أَحَدٌ. And on that day, no one would basically be capable of defending them, or even be the one to take the punishment on their behalf. وَلَا يُوثِقُ وَثَاقَهُ أَحَدٌ. And none are basically going to be capable of untying the whether it's the chains, or untying them to basically secure them, help them, or probably defend them on Judgment Day. But then on the other hand, يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة. That's that point. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة. As for those that had that nafs mutma'inna. What is a nafs al-mutma'inna? So there are in the Quran it basically talks about different kinds of nafs. النفس اللوامة as in سورة القيامة. النفس المطمئنة as in سورة الفجر. And النفس الأمارة بالسوء as in سورة يوسف. Okay, let's look at those. So when you look at النفس المطمئنة, okay, النفس المطمئنة is basically the person that is living a type of tranquility. That's the nafs. Okay, that's النفس المطمئنة. النفس اللوامة, they're continuously blaming themselves, possibly even complaining about everything, blaming themselves, blaming others. You know, that blame. So it's whether blaming and just living the blame. Okay, whether it's blaming others, blaming themselves, or just continuously just having their shortcomings. That's a nafs al-lawama. Or there's a nafs al-amara bisu. Nafs al-amara bisu is basically the nafs that's continuously ordering the person that it resides in to do what's wrong, to do what's evil. Okay, amara, it's just continuously do this. You need to do this. And then of course it gives them the wrong signals that if they don't do it, they're not going to be happy. If they don't do the haram thing, their life is going to be in trouble. They're going to be living a struggle. They're going to be living in trouble, and etc. And then they would start to live somewhat in a panic mode, and that they would have to do it. And that's a type of addiction. Okay. Now, are these types of nafs basically in each and every single one of us? Or is one person living the state of nafs al-mutma'inna, and therefore nafs al-lawama is not there, and someone else is in nafs al-lawama, is in a stage of nafs al-lawama, and someone else is in a stage of al-ammara bis-su? Okay, there are differences of opinions between scholars on that. Or is it that, no, you've got a nafs al-mutma'inna, you've got a nafs al-lawama, and you also have a nafs al-ammara bis-su. You just have to strengthen how you train yourself to make a nafs al-mutma'inna be who you are. You've got a nafs al-ammara bis-su, you have it, it's inside of you, and it depends on whether you get it stronger to overcome who you are, or whether you would overcome it in order to be mutma'inna. But I want to look at this one. The word mutma'in, and the word amara, and the word lawama. Notice that they all of these three words, they have the shadda. Okay, what is that supposed to mean? So when you have the shadda, there is a type of consistency. There's a gradual thing. There's a consistency. There's a determination. That's what the shadda is supposed to indicate. No, mutma'inna. Okay, lawama. Okay, ammara. You see that shadda right there? Ammara, mutma'inna, lawama. Okay, so that's that shadda right there. What does it actually mean? What we get out of it is that consistency that you behave in, that's what's going to determine which category are you really in. Are you a person that is continuously and consistent with طمأنينة? What is طمأنينة again? طمأنينة means tranquility. طمأنينة also means stability. So what does that mean? You're living in a state of stability spiritually, physically, and also mentally. Wait, what does that mean? Like, how do you live physically stable? You physically, the Prophet ﷺ had taught us how to live a certain amount of food to eat, how we basically live a certain life with even our body. Number two, even spiritually, are you doing that balance between your life, your physical life, and also your spiritual life? So when you look at mutma'inna, it's creating this balance and even mentally. When you go through hardships, are you learning how to balance your anger? Are you learning how to balance your sorrow? Are you learning how to balance your reactions? And that's that mutma'inna that you would be in. And that's why when you look at the ayat, it was always talking about how salihin, for example, that for example, you see Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, that فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ, even though the situation was definitely traumatic. A man loses his son, and who basically does this this wrong behavior was basically his own son's, and for his favorite son. And somewhere, he's out there somewhere. His son, who knows, was he eaten by something? What happened to him? And the other ones are not confessing. But then what happened? He's trying to embrace a sabr al-jameel, by the way, but his body couldn't handle it. وَبِيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. He was demonstrating a sabr al-jameel, and he was saying فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ, depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but his body couldn't handle it. His body, وَبِيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ, his eyes developed cataract from the amount. The ayah clearly says min al-huzn. His body couldn't handle it. He was trying to demonstrate it mentally in his behavior, but obviously his body couldn't handle it. But still, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was demonstrating his sabr. Same thing if you were to look at Musa. What was she demonstrating? The ayah says that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ربط على قلبها. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word al-qalb, ربط على قلبها. And it's quite interesting, the ayat that speak about women and emotions, and specifically sorrow and sadness, are actually interesting to scrutinize and study. Because if you were to look at Musa, talked about the sorrow, and also لولا ربطنا على قلبها, what happened? إن كانت لتبدي به. She was going to actually say and reveal the secret about whose boy that is. But it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that helped her overcome it. It was her dhikr. Okay? You look at Sayyidah Maryam as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically describes that she يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا. I wish I had died before all of this. But then she reaches out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That moment when she is basically startled when all of a sudden this angel just appears out of nowhere. And she said, إني أعوذ بالرحمن منك إن كنت تقيا. I seek refuge in al-Rahman. In other words, don't even approach. Don't even do anything. But why? She's a woman right there that basically was away from her family. This man all of a sudden appears, which she didn't know that was an angel. And then she was afraid that, is he going to rape? What is he going to do? But then that's when she reaches out and basically said, I seek refuge in ar-Rahman. What did she do? Just that moment that she got startled in, right away she remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the first thing. So whether in fear, whether in sorrow, whether in the part about women's emotions is very frequent. Okay? Is very frequent. And same thing when you look at Asiya, when in Surah Al-Tahrim, Asiya was also making that dua when she was basically out of fear. You could see that she was fearing her husband, who definitely, I mean, if you were to study the psychology of the Pharaoh, Fir'aun, you would see that he resembled nothing but the narcissist type of behavior. The gaslighting, the playing victim. إني أخاف أن يبدل دينكم. Now he's playing the victim, and at the same time he's gaslighting, and then he would be coming right there to somehow give the justification to all his evil behavior, and at the same time, even with his wife. I mean, just imagine this person, you are married to this king, and this king basically has all the power to overcome every single rule, every single person that basically would stand in front of him. He would basically be the king to decide your death, your torture, and everything about you, and no one can actually stand in front of him. That's basically what happened to Asia. So what does she say? نجني من فرعون وعمله. Ya Allah, protect me from the Pharaoh and all his actions. And وابن لي عندك بيتا في الجنة, and build me a castle or a house in Jannah. And this is extremely important. You could see the different emotions of fear, sorrow, whether it's fear for life or whether it's fear for ird, like Sayyidah Maryam, or whether it's fear for the child, like Musa, okay? And you could see it right there that there was a special emphasis and a special focus on women's feelings, on women's emotions, and representing and demonstrating how these great women, even during a moment of fear over their ird, or fear over the child, or fear over their life, or their wealth, how they would basically be the ones to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And how that came in as a nafs al-mutma'inna. How we would live that nafs al-mutma'inna is basically to balance our emotions, our fears, to let it be basically at the level of tama'nina, at the level of that tranquility, where it doesn't fear losing the power or any of that, because it connects it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you all safe and keep you all in a state of tama'nina. ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. Go back to your Lord Almighty. راضية. Wait a minute. So it described it as mutma'inna, and it described it as راضية. What's the difference? So al-mutma'inna is that it is living in a state of stability. Irrida is living in a state of content. What's the difference, stability and content? Stability is that you would have, whether it's your emotions, your body, all these different things, there it's telling us, when you look at al-lawama, for example, which would be considered as the counterpart, and also al-ammara bis-su', you would see that there is this type of force, this type of impulsivity, this type of motivation, this type of movement that's happening there. That movement with lawama, it becomes this type of an addiction, this type of impulsivity. It's frequently in a state of force, in a state of movement, of telling you of blame, whether it's blaming others or whether it's blaming itself. And of course, the person that's blaming themselves, they're not going to blame others. And the person that's blaming others, they're not going to blame themselves. Why? Because they're always looking for something to blame. It's either themselves or others. But then they live it as a mindset. And this is extremely important. So الطمأنينة is a mindset. Al-lawama is a mindset. Al-ammara bis-su' is a mindset. What mindset are you? What mindset do you feed? What mindset do you reach? Is basically the lifestyle that you live. If you're continuously just blaming, my parents didn't do this to me, my mother did this to me, my husband, when she got married, her husband did this to her, and just continuously just living this mindset of blame and feeling like a victim, then in that situation, they're going to basically harness and live this mindset of a lawama, that they're expecting others to basically either intervene to basically help them, or it's others' fault that they didn't make it, or whatever it is. I'm not saying that others cannot be sometimes a factor to probably something that you had went through. Dhulm does exist, okay? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of you complaining about something or complain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to seek salvation yourself, one, through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two, through you putting in the necessary activity in order to get an uplift of dhulm, if we're talking about dhulm. And even if it is basically probably a sin, lawama, no, don't just blame yourself and feel guilty. No, I want you to get out of feeling guilty to continuously then say, it's enough for me to feel guilty. Now I really have to feel that tama'nina, and yes, be proud that I was capable of overcoming this sin. Proud doesn't mean to have arrogance always. Proud can mean to have arrogance. Proud can also mean to feel content. And that's that word right there, radiyah. To feel al-rida. I'm happy that I was capable of overcoming this sin. I'm happy that I was capable of, alhamdulillah, I was capable of overcoming this shortcoming of mine. I feel good. That's radiyah. And this is extremely important. I think we many times don't focus on this, and we think it's a sin to think that way. It's not a sin to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be feeling that radiyah mardiyah, to feel content that you had become a better person. It doesn't make you a worse person, because radiyah mardiyah, alhamdulillah. But at the same time, you want to worry if you were too radi in the place that was not supposed to be there, and then you probably didn't realize that you were regressing, and that becomes problematic. Now let's look at al-ammara bis-su'. Al-ammara bis-su' is again another type of force. So I want you to see, remember that shadda again? That's telling you that there is this type of nafs that either you train it or it basically continuously trains you. Makes you live this type of paranoia. Like, makes you live this type of paranoia that, hey, you need to do this, or other people are to blame, or it's like an impulsive thing, paranoia. It basically continues to do this activity, whether the activity is to order you to do a su', to do the wrong thing. When you say to do the wrong thing, you're talking about ammara bisu, that it's continuously basically ordering you and making you feel. Let's look into the psychology of a person that is in a state of ammara bisu. The psychology of the person that is living in ammara bisu, they're always afraid that if they don't do this wrong thing, that they might actually not be living happy. They might not be living happy. They might actually die. Their life might be in danger. Their money will be in danger. Their children will be in danger. And then they'll basically be motivated to do the wrong thing. Why? Because al-ammara bis-su is making them live in this panic mode, that I have to get this sugar, or I have to get this drug, or I have to get this alcohol, because if I don't, then I'm not going to live happy. And who actually lives this life? The person that lives this life is the person that had gotten so used to living in this search of pleasure. The ones that are continuously searching for pleasure are the ones that are always in fear of losing that moment of pleasure. That's that manipulation that the brain plays on you. They're afraid of losing that pleasure. But a person that is radi, they're not afraid of losing pleasure because they recognize that their pleasure is in Jannah. They recognize that this dunya, hey, even if I lost the pleasure, that this dunya is basically a dar mamar and not dar maqar, that it's just a passage. And it's not a place that I would dwell in forever. So dar mamar, not dar maqar. فَدُخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي فَدُخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي, and enter with my servants and enter Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, let this ayah be the ayah that we would read before our death. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. That would be beautiful. That would be beautiful. All right, let's go back to the ayah that we were working on, which is page 144. We remembered that one. Here we go. Okay, so حتى إذا جاء أحدكم الموت توفته رسلنا وهم لا يفرطون. So we talked about ثم ردوا إلى الله مولاهم الحق ألا له الحكم وهو أسرع الحاسبين. ثم ردوا. What is ثم? We said ثم actually means that it's talking about a time lapse. ردوا إلى الله. ردوا meaning that they would be resurrected or returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in al-ba'th للحساب. What's the difference between al-ba'th and al-hisab? So al-ba'th is basically resurrecting from the grave. How do we resurrect from the grave? Do we come out like, just waking up all of a sudden and just getting out of the casket? No. You would resurrect from the grave like a plant. Wait, like a plant? Like a plant? Yes, plant. Where's the seed? The seed is going to be that tailbone that you would have at the end. That never decomposes. There was a Chinese study just on that tailbone. It never decomposes. You can crush it, you can put it in acid, it does not decompose. And that's going to be the seed. And that's what contains your DNA and basically contains all the information about you. Okay? And that tailbone, there is another bone that is similar to it, at least in its shape. And that is the one right under the chest. Okay? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in surah al-Tariq, what does he say? What is in surah al-Tariq? السماء والطارق وما أدراك ما الطارق نفس اللمة عليها حافظ فلينظر الإنسان ما خلق من ماء دافق يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب. الترائب are basically the chest bones. الصلب is basically the tailbone, or الصلب is the back. Okay? يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب. That's basically where يخرج بين الصلب والترائب. On Judgment Day, is this speaking about Judgment Day? All the scholars actually talked about يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب إنه على رجعه لقادر. رجعه لقادر. He's capable of bringing that body basically back to its state of how it was created before. So that tailbone and that chest bone Are they not going to decompose? Or is it the tailbone is the only one that's not going to decompose? According to the hadith, the emphasis was on the tailbone, not the chest bone. At least one particular chest bone, not all the chest bones. Okay? يخرج بين الصلب والتراب إنه على رجعه لقادر. Okay? So from that tailbone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send rain, and this rain, according to the hadith, that it would be like semen fluid, and that it would rain, and then people would grow like plants. And that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, once, of course, finally they completely grow, that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders Israfil alayhi salam to blow in the horn, and then their souls are sent back. That's why the word ba'atha means to send. Al-ba'ath is when their souls are sent back to them. Their souls are sent back to them. And why are their souls sent back to them? For the day of accountability, يوم الحساب. مولاهم الحق. What is al-mawla? Al-mawla is, number one, al-mawla means the authority. Al-mawla means the power. Al-mawla also means the one to direct. That's the al-mawla, the one to direct. That's where al-wali comes in. Al-wali comes from the same root. You know, when a woman has a wali, the wali is supposed to be one, that supporter, two, the director, three, the one to also be given security. That's al-mawla. The one to give security, the one to give support, the one to give direction. That's what al-wali is supposed to do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mawlahumul haqq, meaning he's the mawla. He's the one to give direction. He's the one to basically give the support. He's the one to give security. He's the one to basically have the full authority. And ladies, sorry to say this, but it's quite sad how feminism, I know I'm going to get into a completely different topic, but at one point, al-wali had a very important position within the family. Al-wali, whether it was the father, maybe the brother, maybe the husband, whoever is the wali at that, within that girl's life, was basically the one to, one, give her the support, two, direct. And even if it's directing, yes, go to the masjid, don't go to the masjid, or directing that, no, don't go this area, go this area, it's not safe, it's safe, etc., all of that. And unfortunately, feminism was somehow manipulating women, that those awliya are patriarchal, called it patriarchal, and that those awliya are basically stripping away women's rights, and that they would basically act as in a position that is beyond their beyond their right. And that I'm not denying that some did take advantage of that position and had done harm. But those, let's call them rare cases, those cases when certainly some awliya did not live that walaya right, they didn't live responsibility, they abused and certainly abused that responsibility, that taklif that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them, and they thought of it as tashrif, they thought of it as nothing but an honor and not a responsibility. I know that some misused it, but unfortunately, stripping it away from those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by nature had given it to them, had actually caused a lot more women to be in danger by many predators out there, whether it's at work or whether it's on the street, or the list goes on and on. So they thought that, yeah, we can basically keep that patriarchy, quote unquote, and then they let them be an easy target to even more predators. And they would take these random cases of probably case A or B that probably had a wali that misused their power, and then make it appear as if it is the story of all women, that they're basically facing patriarchal abuse, and we would have to take away the patriarchal abuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given Sharia a description. One, Sharia is reflecting the nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in us, created in men, created in women. In other words, Sharia is like the spring of water. It basically is the way how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in nature and how it should be flowing. That's Sharia. The other interpretation of Sharia is that it also is the path, the legislation that people must be submitting their will and submitting their potentials and powers to basically live in accordance to. So when you look at, for example, الرجال قوامون على النساء, is this an informative clause or is this a legislating clause? It's both. It's informative and it's also legislating. It's legislating and telling us that that's where the man is supposed to be in that position to do responsibility, this type of responsibility. At the same time, it was also informing us of the nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in men and created in women. So this type of war that many of the women, Muslim women, unfortunately even embraced on men, thinking of it as a patriarchy that we must basically end because women are suffering from all of that, you're taking them to a worse suffer. If you are taking those random cases and making it seem like it's every single case and using those random cases to be the general rule that you would determine a whole set of rulings, then you're definitely misinterpreting not only those individual cases, but you're also not seeing the other side. You know, yesterday someone asked me, would I send my daughter to an all-girls camp? My daughter asked me the question, the same thing, and I said, I personally wouldn't. Would I open a camp? I would. Why would I open a camp? Isn't that living a self-contradiction? You would open a camp, an all-girls camp, but then you would not send your girl to an all-girl camp. So two things. You know, subhanAllah, let me answer that one inshallah right now. I would open it because I know that for some this is the best solution. So I would love to have something that is available. At the same time, I would not send my daughter to one of those. So I asked my daughter and I said, you know what? I started talking about my experience and in dealing with a lot of those girl problems and those cases that had come to my office and so forth. And she said, that's anecdotal. I said, fair enough. That's anecdotal. So I said, you know what? I want you to ask ChatGPT, who's more at risk in camps. Are boys more at risk or girls more at risk? And I was really astonished that ChatGPT actually laid out certain statistics that girls are more at risk emotionally because at many times they could be more susceptible to getting just of course, seeking emotional endorsement and all of that, and that could be that area that others might actually manipulate them in. So girls are more susceptible in that, and girls are more susceptible to even have their life at risk because they were away from their families. And I was like, well, thank you, ChatGPT, for saving me a lot of time in trying to convince my teenage daughter how preserving the deen and preserving the nafs is considered a priority in Islam, and that certainly I will send boys. And it was actually saying that boys in camps, they're actually at risk of more of physical dangers than actually those dangers in the different kinds of fitan. Okay, so having that being said, when you look at that patriarchy we're basically told and always, I guess, given that scarecrow in order to tell us to strip our paternal and even our maharim from being the ones to give us direction, authority, or even security in order to make us really subject to all the dangers out there. And that's really scary. When I want you to look at Mawlahum al-Haq, for the Lord Almighty is their Mawla, is their authority, is their direction of Haqq, and He is the one to basically had created them, had given them their provision, and then certainly will be the one to resurrect them, and He is their owner, so therefore He is al-Haqq. Al-Haqq, meaning that the Lord Almighty is the one to basically then, because this reflects the same of what the hadith was actually talking about. What is the hadith talking about? Well, the hadith basically says after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would resurrect the people, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would call out, who's the king? Who's the Mawlana? Who's the power? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would announce, Ana al-Malik. He is the king. He is the king. So when you say Mawlahum al-Haqq, meaning that He is the true one to be the king, He is the true one to be in the power to direct all this creation and where it's heading to and where all this life was going for. Okay? مولاهم الحق ألا له الحكم ألا له الحكم isn't basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, verily all the rule, all the power. And that's when you say Mawla. What does al-Mawla mean? Al-Mawla also means al-Hukum. So wait a minute. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true Hukum? Yes. Al-Mawla also means Hukum, also means order, also means power, also means direction. Yes. And that's where the wali comes in. So my father also has the power to tell me, for example, to give us direction at home? Yes. Give us direction at home? Yes. And I should also obey him? Yes. Isn't that patriarchal? Well, salute to patriarchy. Why not? Yes, dear. It's the patriarchy that we need to revive. It's the patriarchy that we definitely need within our ummah. But the word patriarchy was stereotyped to mean something disgusting. But patriarchy is supposed to be something good. It's supposed to be what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created within us. And when he says, why am I using this? Why am I commenting on this one? Even though the ayah is not actually talking about that one. It's that I want you to see the word wali. I want you to see the word wali, and that the wali relates to hukum. It relates to power. It relates to, yes, in this ayah, it's talking about the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Has nothing to do with patriarchy, has nothing to do with any of that. Okay? But all of that, we already know. We already know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the power. All of this ayah is basically just talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. It has nothing to do with manpower. Nothing. Okay? Nothing. But I wanted to seize the moment and actually have you see the word mawla and the word wali, waliya, and that word, and that how it relates to hukum, how it relates to power, how it relates to direction, how it relates to security. Because when you're talking about power, you're not just talking about, yes, I basically am the king and I'm going to be ruling and everybody is just going to be bowing down to me. Well, that's only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, أَلَا لَهُ الْحُكْمُ, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the power, has the direction. Verily then, أَلَا لَهُ الْحُكْمُ وَهُوَ أَسْرَعُ الْحَاسِبِينَ, since he was the one to determine the purpose that preceded the existence, now he has the power to basically judge and determine who lived up to the purpose that he had determined why the whole existence was all about. Who lived it, who didn't live it, who embraced it, who didn't embrace it. And that's why أَلَا لَهُ الْحُكْمُ, he had the hukum, he had the power before creation to determine what creation was all about, and he still has the power when he had recreated creation and brought them back to existence to determine why this whole life was all about. And he is asra'ul hasibin, and he is the fastest. Wait a minute, so how is it that he is the fastest? Are we talking about the fastest, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not necessarily going to rethink? No. He had already determined everything and what was going to basically come about and what is basically going to unfold. There's no change. When you say asra'ul hasibin, meaning that there's no change, that's the inference that we get out of that word. What is al-hasib? Al-hasib comes from the root hasiba. Hasiba can mean to doubt something, okay? And hasaba can mean to count something, okay? To count and to hasiba, to doubt something. Doubt and count, two different words, okay? But this is hasibin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not doubting, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically in complete determination, and that he would be the one to basically hold people accountable. Asra al-hasibin is basically the one to hold the people accountable. Hasiba, okay? Hasiba, to doubt, and to do that hisab is basically to count. Counting people's deeds, the good deeds and the bad deeds, and who deserves what. And there was a question that one time, I think it was Ali ibn Abi Talib that was asked, are people going to be lining up and kind of like at a cash register, one after the other, who's next, to basically count their deeds and all of that? And Ali ibn Abi Talib responded and said, if people are all given rizq at the same time and the Lord Almighty gives them all rizq at the same time, you're getting your rizq right now. Are you standing in line to get your rizq? No. If he's capable of giving them the rizq, then he's capable of giving them their hisab right away. You don't have to wait in line. But wait a minute, but I thought there were lines on Judgment Day. Yes, there are lines on Judgment Day. Definitely, there are lines. We just read it in Surah وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا, and we would know in the other ahadith that talked about lines and rows of people and lines and يحشر المرء مع من أحب. So there is a certain line. And in Surah Al-Hadid, it was talking about the انظرونا نقتبس من نوركم قيل ارجعوا وراءكم فالتمسوا نورا فضرب بينهم بسور له باب باطنه فيه الرحمة وظاهره من قبله العذاب. You could say that there is a line, there's a front line, there's a back row, there's a, all of that. There's definitely a specific order. Okay. And what does that order contain? And how does that hisab actually happen? Definitely. There are some people, as in Sahih Muslim, that basically proceed and go to Jannah before other people. How many, how long, all of that is ilm al-ghayb. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, make us amongst those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the malaika would say, Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. اللهم آمين. This is it, everybody. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. I know we kind of went off track with the tafsir today, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a moment of dhikr, a moment of remembrance, a moment of maw'idha. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. So tomorrow, inshallah, قُلْ مَن يُنَجِّيكُم مِّن ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ فَادْعُونَهُ تَضَرُّعًا وَخُفْيَةً. Is it khufya or is it khifa? We'll talk about that, inshallah, tomorrow. لئن أنجانا or لئن أنجيتنا من هذه لنكونن من الشاكرين. So what's the difference anyways? قل هو القادر على أن يبعث عليكم عذابا من فوقكم أو من تحت أرجلكم. So فوقكم, up above you, تحت أرجلكم, right underneath you. It's like, do certain people get a different kind of a punishment, or how does this work? أو يلبسكم شيعا. يلبسكم. Well, I thought يلبسكم means to wear something. So what's going to happen? Like the Shia? Is this talking about Shia, or who is it really talking about? Or is it Shia to mean groups? Or is it talking about يلبسكم شيعا? Is this an evidence about Shia? No, we'll talk about that. يذيق بعضكم بأس بعض. So what about that hadith when the Prophet ﷺ actually said that he made the dua that no other power would overcome the Muslims? So what's happening in Gaza? Certainly that, is it the Muslims actually attacking them? How do we understand that one? انظر كيف نصرف الآيات لعلهم يفقهون. So what is fiqh? This is a class of fiqh right there. How do we understand this one? وكذب به قومك وهو الحق قل لست عليكم بوكيل لكل نبأ مستقر وسوف تعلمون. I heard that this ayah, that someone can actually read it if they had a toothache, and that they would write that ayah on a piece of paper and put it on their toothache. Guess all those dentists would just close down because we got that kind of ruqya, and then we could just put it on there and then just watch it as it heals. Can we do that? Is there anything really like that? Are you serious? Well, stay tuned for tomorrow. Inshallah, we'll talk about all of those questions that I was basically provoking you to get motivated to join us tomorrow, inshallah. So stay tuned for tomorrow because there's a lot to say. And yes, it was a very heavy and a very scary one. So inshallah, we'll join tomorrow. If there's anybody that would like to say anything, or probably, mashallah, we've got those consistent names again and again, mashallah. I'm very proud of all of you. If there is anybody that would like to say anything, maybe missed out on something, or they would, it's okay, you know. Um, I one time had this lady, okay, come in, okay, and she came in and was definitely looking angry, and comes in and then sits down in the crowd. And then little by little, she starts laughing and she starts giving these smiles. And after class, she said, I am so sorry. You know what I came here for? I said, what did you come here for? She said, I actually came in because I was told you're so anti-women and you're so misogynist. And I came in to really fight you. But then I saw someone else. She discovered that it was a completely different person that she had expected. She thought I was phonetic extremist and a person that was anti-women and all of that, and discovered that it was somebody else. But yeah. So ladies, if you would like to say something else, even if you had come to probably stand against me, that's okay. You can come in and just say, hey, I was told this and this, and I would like to say this and this. That's okay too.